your song early, so I apologize for that. But I do appreciate Brother Sam leading that song, leading that hymn. And I really love the refrain at the end, many things about tomorrow. I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. That goes perfectly in line with this morning's lesson. This morning, the lesson is entitled, We're in No Lion's Den, or We Are Not in the Lion's Den. So this morning we're going to be taking a look at the book of Daniel. I know that when we are young in our Christian walk, whether that be through Vacation Bible School, through Sunday morning Bible class, or even as adults just reading through the Bible, when we look at the book of Daniel, typically we look at two different accounts. We look at two different historical accounts. We look at Daniel in the lion's den, and then we look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, when we're focusing on those two historical accounts, typically as we're reading through them, we look at it through the lens of God's miraculous salvation of Daniel by shutting up the mouth of the lions, and of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being saved in the fiery furnace and not being consumed by the fire. But this morning, I want to take a look at it from a different perspective. While these accounts, it's absolutely important to look at it from the miraculous events that did take place and looking at it as a great lesson of the power of God. But today I want to focus on the aspect of these accounts that we find that we can directly apply to our lives today. And that lesson is the strict obedience of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even when faced with certain death. Now I put quotes around death because they were saved by God, but they weren't promised that. They weren't certain that that was going to happen. Now, this morning, we're going to be looking at several chapters in the book of Daniel. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. I could paraphrase these accounts, but the Bible tells it much better than I can, so I'm just going to read straight from the Bible. The book of Daniel is separated into two different portions, two different halves. If you look at chapters 1 through 6, they're historical accounts. Chapter 1 is of the land of Jerusalem being besieged by King Nebuchadnezzar. King Jehoiakim was overthrown by King Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar decided to take captives the best and brightest, strongest and fittest of the young men. Now, he didn't take these captives to put them to death. Better yet, he was going to take them, he was going to provide them years of training, years of the best of his food, the best of his drink, the best of everything that he could give them so that they could be the best servants that they possibly could be. Now, in chapter 1, I'm not going to read through all of chapter 1 because I'm going to do a great deal of reading here in a moment. In chapter 1, Daniel sets himself apart by coming to the conclusion that he's not going to defile himself with the delicacies that are provided by King Nebuchadnezzar. He says, I don't want to do that to myself. I don't believe it to be fit for myself or my three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which I wonder if they had a say in the matter or if they just went along with it. You read through the accounts and you can see their personalities shine through a little bit, which we'll get into in just a moment. But Daniel decided that he wasn't going to defile himself with the king's delicacies. So he asked to be given just vegetables and water. And he said, give me a portion of 10 days. And if after those 10 days I'm not fit for service, I'll succumb to the delicacies that you provided for me, but give me this period of time. Now, after that 10-day portion, Daniel and his three friends were shown to be the brightest, the best, the strongest, and the wisest in the land, so they served directly under King Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel set himself apart, he set his friends apart alongside him, and God delivered them and then brought them in favor in the sight of King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, that's important because Daniel set himself apart in chapter 1, but God is going to set Daniel apart in chapter 2. And we're going to read pretty much the entirety of chapter 2 for context that leads up to chapter 3 of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, I apologize if, earlier I spoiled the ending to Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in saying that they were delivered by God. But the account happened about 2,600 years ago. So if you weren't up to speed just yet, I'm sorry for spoiling that, but we'll go into it in greater detail in just a moment. But in chapter 2, it says, "Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, 'I've had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream.'" Now I know that, myself personally, it's an interesting position that Nebuchadnezzar is in, because when I have strange dreams, there's no way that I would want anybody else to know the events that took place, but he's asking for somebody to interpret them for him. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, that we will give the interpretation." The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "My decision is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation." So talk about high risk, high reward. So if they are not able to do so, they're going to be cut into pieces. But if they are able to do so, they're going to be held in high regard. Verse 7 says, "They answered again and said, 'Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll give its interpretation.' The king answered and said, 'I know for certain that you would gain time, and because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me, till the time is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation.' The Chaldeans answered the king and said, 'There is no man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except for the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh.'" They got part of that right. "For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, which included Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, who was the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, 'Why is the decree from the king so urgent?' Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, which were also Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, 'Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and I praise you, O God of my father. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand.'" So now Daniel's going to explain the dream. "Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, with whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said to them, 'Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation.'" Now I like to look at the personality of Arioch here in verse 25, because it says, "Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, 'I have found a man of the captains of Judah who will make known to me the king and the interpretation,'" because he was just ordered to put to death all of the wise men of Babylon. These are men that probably worked under him for quite some time, and he was just given the difficult order to kill them. So when he's told that maybe we could cease this and move in a different direction, that when I think of him running quickly to tell the king, I think of him just getting up, "All right, let's go, let's take care of it." The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen, and its interpretation?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men and the astrologers and magicians and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. Now, Daniel goes through and he gives to Nebuchadnezzar what his dream is. As for you, O king, the thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what will come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you watched while the stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar takes this next part a little too literally. You, O king, are the king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory, and wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Now, I think that his head probably grew a few sizes when he heard that. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as for the toes of the feet, were partly of iron and partly of clay, so that kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of the kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw the stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is true. Now, before we get to Nebuchadnezzar's reaction, I really think that he probably stopped listening after he was told that he was the head of gold. Because in the interpretation, his kingdom was going to be destroyed. Did he pay attention to that? We're going to see in chapter 3 that not closely enough. And in chapter 4, in the fall of King Nebuchadnezzar, it directly shows that he goes against Daniel's warning against being puffed up. So verse 46 says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief administrators over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat at the gate of the king. Now I know that was a lot of reading, setting up context for chapters 3 and chapter 6. I'm going to go through them a little quickly because I see that my time is running out. It can be fairly long-winded. So we're going to get right into chapter 3. So, chapter 3 starts with Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. This is where I talked about hearing that he was the head of gold a little too literally. It says Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and his width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship will be cast immediately into the burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard that the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 8 is where we learn about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's reaction to this. Therefore, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Now, first of all, these are some of the same individuals that were saved from certain death after Daniel was able to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. So how quickly they forget what Daniel had done for him. But they go to Nebuchadnezzar and say, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree." So remember this. You've made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, that they shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you've set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and so they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I've set up?" So he doubles down here. And he says, "Now, if you are ready, and the time that you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, you'll fall down and worship the image which I've made. And good, so be it. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately in the midst of the burning fiery furnace." What I like to think about here with Nebuchadnezzar, and not immediately just throwing them into the fiery furnace, is he had put in a lot of work with these people. They had been working under him for several years. They started off with 3 years of training. They had shown that they were the best, smartest, wisest, and fittest of the land, along with Daniel. And now he's seeing that they're strictly being disobedient. But he's saying, "Listen, I'm going to give you another shot. Whenever you hear the flute, harps, psaltery, and lyre all in symphony, bow down and we'll just forget about this." But I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's response. So in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace." Now, he said he is able to deliver us. They didn't know that he will deliver us. So it's very important that he says he is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, and this is very important, but if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Now, for sake of time, I'm not going to read the entirety of the rest of this chapter, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown in the fiery furnace for their disobedience. Their disobedience to the king was strict obedience to God, because the second commandment was to not bow down and worship any other gods other than the true and living God. And they weren't going to do that, even up to the point of certain death. So King Nebuchadnezzar had some of his guards take these men, and the furnace was 7 times hotter than it normally is heated to. So hot that the guards that threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace were consumed before even making it there. And I think it's important to look at that detail, because there's no scientific reasoning behind it. There's no reasoning other than a miraculous saving by God that they could have made it out of that fiery furnace, because the guards were consumed before even making it there. So they were saved out of the fiery furnace, and they were obedient not because of the knowledge that they were going to be saved by God, but they were obedient knowing that it was the correct thing to do regardless. Something similar happens in chapter 6. Let's go to Daniel chapter 6. This is the plot against Daniel. So now this is after King Nebuchadnezzar has kind of gone mad, had turned into what's considered a beast of the field, where he had lost his mind for a little while. His Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, was king for a little while, and then now we have King Darius. I'm going to start reading in chapter 6, and then I'm going to wrap things up. So chapter 6, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So," and I like looking at the word "so," it's because of this good spirit that he had in him, "the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful. Nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any charge against Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of God.'" Now, I'm going to stop there for just a second. Think of if, for those of us that still work currently, if your coworkers could find no charge against you other than how strong your faith was. Not cutting out early, a few minutes early on a Friday, not borrowing a pen when you need one to take home. They could find no charge against him other than what was revolving around his faith. So they were like, if we got to get rid of this guy, we're going to have to find it concerning the law of his God. Verse 6 says, "So the governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, 'King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together and established a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except for you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and of the Persians, which does not alter.'" And they're going to remind him of that later on in the chapter, that this decree will not alter. "Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree." I'm sure that he liked being thought of to where nobody else could be worshipped within 30 days other than him, because not all kings are the most humble individuals, so I'm sure that he liked that decree. Verse 10 is very important, because you can't think that Daniel was unaware of this decree with his behavior that happens next. Verse 10 says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled, and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. 'Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?'" So before letting him know that Daniel's been caught, they're like, "Hey, remember this decree that you signed? We got some news for you." The king answered and said, "This thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard to you, O king, or for the decree that you signed, but he makes his petition 3 times a day." And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes should be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the signets of his lords, and the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. I'm going to skip down to verse 21. So King Darius wasn't able to sleep that night, because you'd think that he takes favor over Daniel, because he was very obedient. He was a great worker. He was a great individual. And God had placed within him a pure heart. And I'm certain that Darius didn't want to lose this individual because he knew that he was honest. He knew that he was trustworthy. And anybody in any management position knows that those are few and far between. They're difficult to come by. So Darius was unable to sleep that night, and he woke up early in the morning, or got up early in the morning, and came down to the lion's den. Verse 21, then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. So, told you earlier, spoiler alert for what happens. God was able to and delivered Daniel from the lion's den. Now, was Daniel certain that that was going to happen whenever he still bowed down and worshipped God, even after the decree was signed? No. He knew that God was able. He knew that it was a possibility. He potentially knew that it was a possibility, but did he know for certain that God was going to shut the mouths of the lions and save him from any type of harm? He did not know that. Daniel and his friends were faithful. Not because they were certain that God would deliver them, but because they knew that that's what God required of his people. We as Christians need not to be faithful and obedient because of the results that we expect from God, but because it is always the correct thing to do. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego can be obedient when threatened with certain death, we should be able to withstand the temptation of folding when our circumstances become difficult. We're not facing a lion's den. So, as Brother Chuck stated in his Wednesday evening Bible class last Wednesday, he said that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of God. But I'd like to take that a step further. It's a great quote, and as soon as I heard it, I knew that there was some application to it. I want to take it a step further. So, instead of peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of God, peace is not the absence of trial, but the promise of salvation. Matthew 10:28 says, while Jesus was speaking to the apostles, says, do not fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the body and soul in hell. These bodies are only temporary. Regardless of what happens to me, I have the hope of eternal salvation through Jesus Christ. But now, the lesson that I've prepared hasn't necessarily been developed to... The context wasn't sharing the gospel for somebody who hasn't heard it before, but it's as simple as hearing the word of God and then believing in his son. You believe in his son, Jesus Christ, that he was sent down to earth for our salvation and for the remission of our sins. We need to repent and turn away from our sins and as Acts 2:38 says, be baptized for the remission of our sins. And then once that's done, it's not just, we wash our hands, go home, and continue living our life. We need to live life as a new man, putting away our sinful behavior, and living a life patterned after Jesus Christ. So if there's anybody here this morning that has a need, we'll be happy to help you as we stand and sing.